Washington was outnumbered. The battle that saved America December 1776. The American Revolution was collapsing. George Washington's army had been driven out of New York, chased across New Jersey, and forced to retreat behind the Delaware River. Thousands of soldiers had deserted. Others were sick, exhausted, or nearly barefoot. Their enlistments were about to expire, and many Americans had begun to believe that independence was an impossible dream. Across the river, British and Hessian forces waited confidently for winter to finish what their weapons had begun. But Washington understood something his enemies did not. If he waited, his army might disappear. If he attacked, he might lose everything in a single night. With the future of the Revolution hanging in the balance, Washington chose the most dangerous path. He ordered his men to cross an ice-filled river during a violent winter storm and march toward Trenton. What followed was more than a battlefield victory. It was the moment that gave the American Revolution another chance to survive. Only months earlier, the Revolution had appeared full of promise. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress had approved the Declaration of Independence. Its words announced the birth of a new nation, but declaring independence was far easier than defending it. Great Britain possessed one of the most powerful military forces in the world. Its navy controlled the seas, its soldiers were trained professionals, and its government had the wealth to hire thousands of German troops, commonly called Hessians, to reinforce the British army. Washington commanded an army that was still learning how to fight. Many of his soldiers were farmers, laborers, craftsmen, and young volunteers. They lacked proper uniforms, weapons, food, and military experience. Some had joined for only a few months. Others were loyal to their home colonies, but had not yet developed a strong sense of national unity. The British campaign in New York exposed every weakness in the American army. In August 1776, Washington suffered a devastating defeat at the Battle of Long Island. His men narrowly escaped destruction during a nighttime evacuation across the East River. More defeats followed. The British captured New York City, defeated American forces at White Plains, and seized Fort Washington along with thousands of prisoners. Washington retreated across New Jersey while British troops followed closely behind. Town after town fell under British control. American supporters hid their political sympathies, while loyalists openly welcomed the King's army. General William Howe, the British commander, believed the rebellion was close to ending. He offered pardons to colonists who renewed their loyalty to the crown, and thousands accepted. By early December, Washington had crossed the Delaware River into Pennsylvania. He ordered every available boat along the New Jersey shoreline removed or destroyed, preventing the British from immediately following him. The river gave his army temporary protection, but it could not solve the greater crisis. Washington had only a few thousand soldiers fit for duty. Many were hungry. Some wrapped pieces of cloth around their feet because they had no shoes. Their bloody footprints marked the frozen roads. Disease moved through the camps, and morale had almost disappeared. More dangerously, the enlistments of many soldiers would end on December 31st. When their service expired, they could legally return home. Washington knew that unless something changed, he might soon possess an army in name only. Thomas Paine, who had marched with the retreating Americans, understood the depth of the crisis. In December, he published the first installment of The American Crisis. Its message acknowledged that the struggle had entered its darkest moment, but it also challenged Americans to remain committed when freedom demanded sacrifice. Washington ordered the words read to his soldiers. Words, however, could not restore the revolution by themselves. Washington needed a victory. Across the Delaware River, approximately 1,400 Hessian soldiers occupied Trenton, New Jersey. They were commanded by Colonel Johann Rall, an experienced officer who had fought during the American defeats in New York. The Hessians were disciplined soldiers, but their position was isolated from the main British forces. Washington designed an ambitious plan. His forces would cross the Delaware in 3 separate groups during the night of December 25th. They would then converge on Trenton before sunrise on December 26th. The operation depended on surprise, accurate timing, and weather conditions that would hide the Americans from enemy patrols. It was an extraordinarily dangerous gamble. If the British discovered the crossing, Washington's men could be trapped against the river. If the boats were scattered by ice, the army could be divided. If the march took too long, the Hessians would have time to prepare their defenses. Washington's overall position remained badly outmatched by the British Empire, although the Americans would achieve a numerical advantage at the immediate point of attack in Trenton. His true disadvantage was strategic. The British possessed more soldiers, more resources, stronger supply systems, and control of the major cities. Washington had only one advantage that mattered on that freezing night. The enemy did not expect him to attack. After darkness fell on Christmas night, Washington's soldiers gathered at McConkey's Ferry. Rain turned to sleet and snow. The wind grew stronger, and chunks of ice moved rapidly through the Delaware River. Experienced boatmen, many from Colonel John Glover's Massachusetts regiment, guided the vessels through the storm. Men, horses, and 18 artillery pieces had to be transported across the dark water. Washington hoped the crossing would be completed before midnight. Instead, it continued for hours. 2 other American forces were supposed to cross farther south, but the dangerous ice prevented them from reaching New Jersey. Washington did not yet know that they had failed. His main force was now advancing alone. By approximately 4 o'clock in the morning, about 2,400 soldiers had crossed with Washington. They still faced a march of nearly 9 miles to Trenton. The storm struck them directly. Muskets became wet. Roads turned slippery. Men struggled through snow, mud, and freezing rain. At one point, Washington was informed that the ammunition carried by some soldiers had become too wet to fire. His response was uncompromising. They would use their bayonets if necessary. The town had to be taken. The army divided into 2 columns. General Nathaniel Greene led one group toward the northern side of Trenton, while General John Sullivan approached from the west and south. The goal was to strike simultaneously, block the roads, and prevent the Hessians from escaping or organizing a counterattack. Shortly after 8 o'clock on the morning of December 26th, the Americans reached Trenton. The storm was still falling. Hessian guards saw the approaching troops and fired warning shots before retreating toward the center of town. American artillery quickly took positions at the heads of King Street and Queen Street. Captain Alexander Hamilton, a young artillery officer who would later become one of the most influential figures in the new nation, helped direct cannon fire down the streets. The Hessians rushed from their quarters and attempted to form battle lines. Colonel Rahl tried to organize a response, but the American attack came from several directions. Washington's artillery controlled the main roads, while infantry advanced between buildings and fences. The fighting was intense but brief. Hessian units attempted to recover their cannons, only to be driven back by American fire. Some tried to escape toward roads outside the town, but Sullivan's troops blocked the southern route. Other groups became separated and surrounded. Colonel Rahl was mortally wounded while attempting to rally his soldiers. Without clear leadership and with American forces controlling the streets, organized resistance collapsed. In less than an hour, the battle was over. More than 900 Hessian soldiers were captured. Approximately 20 were killed, and dozens were wounded. The Americans seized muskets, ammunition, artillery, food, uniforms, and other supplies desperately needed by Washington's army. Most remarkably, Washington had achieved the victory with very light combat losses. 2 American soldiers froze to death during the march, while only a handful were wounded in the fighting. Among the wounded was future President James Monroe. Yet Washington's men were exhausted and British. Reinforcements could arrive quickly. He therefore ordered the army, its prisoners, and the captured equipment back across the Delaware River. Tactically, Trenton was a small battle. It did not destroy the British army. It did not force Britain to recognize American independence. It did not end the war, but its psychological effect was enormous. Before Trenton, the revolution had seemed to be dying. After Trenton, Americans knew that the British and Hessians could be defeated. Soldiers who had planned to leave began reconsidering. New volunteers joined the cause. Civilians recovered some of their confidence, and Congress gained precious time to continue supporting the war. Washington had also revealed qualities that would define his leadership. He was not always a brilliant battlefield tactician, and he had already suffered serious defeats. But he possessed an extraordinary ability to endure a crisis without surrendering to it. He understood that preserving the army was often more important than holding territory. He also recognized the rare moment when preservation required taking a great risk. The British responded quickly. General Charles Cornwallis moved toward Trenton with a powerful force, determined to crush Washington. On January 2nd, 1777, the two armies confronted each other near Sunpink Creek. American defenders resisted several British assaults as night approached. Cornwallis believed Washington was trapped between the British Army and the Delaware River. December 1776. The American Revolution was collapsing. Snow covered the roads of New Jersey. The Continental Army was retreating, and the British believed victory was only a matter of time. General George Washington had lost battle after battle. His soldiers were hungry, exhausted, and poorly equipped. Thousands had deserted, while many others were preparing to leave when their enlistments expired at the end of the year. Across the colonies, confidence in independence was disappearing. But in the darkest moment of the war, Washington made a decision that changed everything. He would cross an ice-filled river on Christmas night and launch a surprise attack against the Hessian garrison at Trenton. It was not simply a battle for one small New Jersey town. It was a desperate attempt to save the army, restore the revolution, and keep the dream of an independent America alive. In the summer of 1776, Washington had commanded a large army around New York City, but numbers alone could not overcome British experience, discipline, and naval power. At the Battle of Long Island, the Americans were outmaneuvered and nearly trapped. Washington managed to evacuate his soldiers across the East River under the cover of darkness, preserving the army, but he could not stop the British advance. Manhattan fell. Fort Washington was captured. Thousands of American soldiers became prisoners, and valuable weapons and supplies were lost. Washington withdrew through New Jersey while General William Howe's British forces pursued him. Town after town came under British control. Loyalists. After 8 o'clock on the morning of December 26th, the attack began. American troops entered Trenton from the north and west. Artillery commanded by Colonel Henry Knox was placed where it could dominate key streets. The Hessians rushed from their quarters and attempted to form organized defensive lines, but the surprise was nearly complete. Colonel Rahl tried to rally his regiments and launch a counterattack. The narrow streets, American cannon fire, and pressure from multiple directions made coordination difficult. Gun smoke mixed with snow as officers shouted commands through the storm. Contrary to the popular legend, the Hessians were not simply helpless because they had celebrated Christmas too heavily. They were professional soldiers who attempted to resist. Their true disadvantage came from surprise, confusion, poor intelligence, and the speed of Washington's attack. Rahl was mortally wounded while trying to restore order. American forces blocked major escape routes, while some Hessian soldiers fled toward the surrounding countryside. In less than an hour and a half, organized resistance collapsed. More than 900 Hessian soldiers were captured, along with artillery, muskets, ammunition, and desperately needed supplies. A small number were killed or wounded, while several hundred escaped. American combat losses were remarkably light, although the winter march and exposure caused serious suffering. Tactically, Trenton was a small engagement compared with the enormous battles fought in Europe. Washington faced another dangerous problem. He had prisoners to control, exhausted soldiers to protect, and British reinforcements nearby. He ordered the army back across the Delaware into Pennsylvania. The return crossing was difficult, but the captured Hessians and military supplies provided visible proof that the victory was real. News spread rapidly. After months of retreat and humiliation, Americans finally had a reason to celebrate. Washington used the victory to persuade soldiers to remain in service. He appealed directly to men whose enlistments were about to expire, asking them to stay for a few more weeks. Their decision gave him the manpower needed to continue the campaign. New volunteers arrived, public morale improved, and political leaders regained confidence in the Continental Army. But Washington was not finished. He crossed the Delaware again and returned to Trenton. The British responded by sending General Charles Cornwallis with a larger force to crush him. On January 2, 1777, American troops fought a defensive action along Sunpink Creek. Repeated British attacks failed to break Washington's. Washington quietly withdrew most of his soldiers. Wagons and artillery moved along back roads while a small group maintained the campfires and made sounds suggesting that the army was preparing defensive positions. Washington then marched around Cornwallis and struck the British at Princeton on January 3rd. The American victory there forced Britain to abandon several exposed posts in New Jersey. Within 10 days, Washington had transformed the campaign. The army that had appeared to be dying had defeated enemy forces at Trenton, escaped a larger British army at Assunpink Creek, and attacked again at Princeton. These actions did not end the Revolutionary War. Years of hardship remained, including defeats, disease, political conflict, and the brutal winter at Valley Forge. Yet the victories changed the psychological balance of the revolution. The British learned that occupying cities did not guarantee control of the countryside. The Americans learned that the British military system was powerful but not invincible. Most importantly, Washington demonstrated the kind of leadership that would define his command. He accepted risk, but his gamble was not blind. He gathered intelligence, protected his retreat, chose an isolated target, and moved before his army dissolved. When parts of his plan failed, he adapted instead of surrendering the initiative. He understood that war was fought not only with soldiers and weapons, but also with morale, time, perception, and political will. Trenton saved the revolution because it changed what Americans believed was possible. Before the crossing, independence appeared to be slipping away. After Trenton and Princeton, resistance once again seemed capable of survival. Washington did not destroy Britain's army, capture a major city, or win the war in a single morning. He accomplished something more urgent. He prevented defeat from becoming permanent. The image of Washington crossing the Delaware later became an American legend, often shown with heroic poses and clear skies. The reality was colder, darker, and more uncertain. The soldiers were not marching confidently toward a guaranteed victory. They were frightened, frozen, exhausted, and aware that failure might end everything for which they had fought. That is what makes the moment so important. Courage did not come from knowing they would win. It came from advancing when victory appeared almost impossible. Washington entered Christmas night as the commander of a retreating army. He emerged from the campaign as the leader of a revolution that could still fight. The Battle of Trenton was small in size, but enormous in consequence. It gave the Continental Army weapons, prisoners, confidence, and precious time. It restored faith in Washington's leadership and reminded the colonies that empires could be challenged when discipline, intelligence, and bold action came together. America was not saved by one man alone, and it was not saved by one battle alone. It was saved by thousands of ordinary soldiers who crossed a frozen river when their cause seemed lost. Their victory did not guarantee independence, but without it, the revolution might never have survived long enough to achieve independence. When history reached its darkest winter, Washington refused to wait for defeat. He crossed the Delaware, attacked at dawn, and gave the American Revolution another chance to live.